We will continue with our program now with our last session downstairs. The session has gone through some severe turbulences. The original moderator, Jana has had to stay in Kenya because she got sick. Our other speaker, Bright Simmons, was on an odyssey, traveling for 3 days to make it here just in time. So this is going to be a little bit improvised, but we definitely will sort it out. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Nathan Eagle on stage. As a MIT research scientist in 2005, I believe, he developed a mobile phone computing curriculum that ever since has been deployed in Africa. And he's definitely very much involved in this, what they call mobile leapfrog. Recently, he founded his company, Jana, and he's going to tell us all about it right now. Thank you.
To the end. I'm going to start my talk with a little bit of a story of kind of how we ended up starting this company, and it actually has to do with my phobia with needles, right? So I was working in a rural Kenyan hospital, and I had these two nurses come up to me, and there had been a traffic accident. And they had run out of blood at the local blood bank, and they desperately needed to have a blood transfusion. When two rural nurses come to you and say, look, there's been a massive accident, we need your blood, even if you have a phobia with needles, you suck it up, and then you ultimately, you give blood and then feel very heroic afterwards and show off your bruise and talk about your story to anyone who wants to listen. And so that's what happened to me. But then one of the striking things was about 3 weeks later, a different pair of nurses came to me and said, hey, there's been a traffic accident, and we desperately need your blood. We've run out of blood at this local blood bank. Now, by the fourth time this happened over the course of about 3 months, it was out of my own self-interest and anything else that I started looking into, what's the deal with blood supply levels across Kenya? Why did they keep running out of blood? And the short answer is latency, right? We had, there was an individual, in this case, who was working out of Mombasa, who would just drive up and down the Kenyan coast, looking at what kind of blood supply levels were across these different rural hospitals, and ultimately trying to figure out where the blood was needed. So when the hospital ran out of blood, it could be up to 4 weeks before they would ultimately be replenished. We ended up, so this was at a time when I was taking a sabbatical from MIT, and I was a Fulbright professor at the University of Nairobi. And so I thought kind of a fun student project would be to build a blood bank system that let rural nurses text in what the current blood supply levels were. And ultimately, we built this beautiful visualization that let the guys in these centralized blood banks see in real time, what the blood supply levels were, and more importantly, where the blood was needed. This project got a reasonable amount of press, and for the first week, it was awesome, right? We had these rural nurses across Kenya texting in the current blood supply levels. We had the guys at the centralized blood banks logging in and kind of just refreshing every hour to see what the blood supply levels were and where the blood was needed. But the second week we went live, about half the nurses stopped texting in the data. And about a month after that project had started, virtually no nurse was using the platform anymore. And it was ultimately deemed a failure. And this SMS blood bank system, it failed not because of any technical shortcoming. I mean, technically, this thing was rock solid. It failed because of a fundamental lack of insight on my part about the cost of using a mobile phone. By asking these rural nurses every day to send a text message, what I didn't appreciate was that price of a text message represents a fairly substantial fraction of a rural nurse's day's wage. We're essentially asking them to take a pay cut in exchange for participating in the system. Something that fundamentally wasn't fair. But I was in this lucky position where, as an academic, my background is basically helping mobile operators analyze data. And so at that point in time, I basically had read-write access to the back-end billing systems of virtually every mobile operator in East Africa. And so I wrote a 20-line Python script, something that basically was able to, when a properly formatted text message with the blood supply levels came in, we would essentially credit that rural nurse with about 10 shillings. Enough to cover the cost of the SMS and like a penny or two extra to say thank you. And a switch flipped. Suddenly, for that opportunity to earn 1 penny, virtually every rural nurse re-engaged with the platform, right? And more importantly, it led me to start thinking about airtime as a surrogate for currency. Suddenly, we can actually start compensating people. And we started thinking about what other types of things, besides just getting blood data from rural hospitals, what other types of things can we actually compensate people in these underserved, understudied communities to do? So fast forwarding now to today, left my job within academia and have integrated this airtime rewards platform, which is now more than 20 lines of Python, but relatively straightforward. We've integrated it into the back-end billing systems of now 237 mobile operators as of last Friday. So we're live in 102 countries. And what this means is that we have the ability to instantly put money in denominations as low as 10 cents into the pockets of 3.48 billion people. And we can do it in over 70 currencies right now, and it's friction-free. So there's no other company on the planet that has that kind of capability. We're the world's largest compensation platform. And I see this as this giant compensation hammer, right? And the world looks like nails. There's so many different reasons why we want to pay people. But we're only in emerging markets. And the reason there is simply because this is where the growth is. I mean, if you look at middle-class consumption today, the majority is from Western Europe and North America. But if you fast forward to when my 3-year-old son graduates from high school, the global economy really will have flipped. And the vast majority of middle-class consumption is not coming from Western Europe or North America, but it's coming from countries like India, from China, from Brazil. And so there is an extraordinary amount of money being spent on things like advertising in the developing world. Right? $200 billion is getting basically funneled into the pockets of people who own the billboards in those rural communities, or the television channels, or the radio stations. $200 billion. And these global brands, they're desperate to try to figure out how do you engage with your next billion consumers. These consumers, they're not just like North American consumers or consumers from Western Europe. The vast majority of these consumers, while they all have phones, they're on prepaid plans. And consumers in emerging markets, they spend upwards of 10% of their day's wage on mobile airtime. 10% of their income is being spent basically for the privilege of using their handset to communicate with their friends and family, whether that's voice or data or text messaging. It's an extraordinary amount of money. And so if you take that woman in Jakarta who's making $5 a day and she's paying 50 cents every day to use her phone, this is a real problem for her. And the ability to give her something like 25 cents in exchange for doing something on behalf of a brand. It may not be telling us what the current blood supply levels were, but perhaps it's telling us what her attitudes and usages towards laundry detergent could be. That adds tremendous value to her life. So ultimately, what we ended up starting off as is a market research company, where before these large global brands like P&G started working with us to try to figure out what women in the Philippines think about laundry detergent, they're literally flying people from Cincinnati to Manila. Right? They're renting Land Rovers, they're driving out in the field and doing face-to-face surveys. We have this massive database of these consumers. We have the ability to literally compensate virtually every consumer in the Philippines. And so it's just far more cost-effective for us to be able to provide that a quick survey via the mobile phone, give that woman 10 pesos instantly. It's far more cost-effective. We can turn around the data far faster. It's just better. But the reason why I think we've gotten so much more interest is what companies like P&G and increasingly companies like Google and Microsoft are using this technology for. And it's ultimately to try to drive trial. So in P&G's case, it's if we can give someone 10 rupees or 10 pesos for filling out a survey about laundry detergent, we can give her 50 pesos for trying Tide for the very first time. We can start actually getting her to try out digital services as well. Because I think it's really important for people to note that in emerging markets, airtime really is a currency, and when you use your phone, you're paying for every bite that you consume. Right? So if you want a consumer in a place like Vietnam or Bolivia or Nigeria to start using your web product, your digital product, you're taking money out of their pocket. Just like I was taking money out of those rural nurses' pocket because we were trying to get data from them. If you're trying to push them a video or you're trying to get them to upload something, that is money out of their pocket consistently. So what we're able to do now with this technology is offset that cost. We're getting people in these high-growth markets to try something out for free. And the vision here is that, These big global brands are spending $200 billion every year on mass media advertising. What we're aiming to do is redirect about half of that spend away from the pockets of the people who own billboards in that rural community and directly into the pockets of the very consumers that these global brands are trying to reach. And if we're successful in that, we can reduce that airtime expense from 10% of that woman's day's wage down to 5%. And we can do that for 1 billion people, ultimately giving 1 billion people a 5% raise. 5% more money that they could spend, our operator partners love that. That's 5% more money they could spend on airtime. Our clients love that because that's 5% more money they could use to buy a shampoo or buy an app on their phone. But from our company's perspective, we don't really care, right? You don't get many opportunities in life to create an economic impact at this magnitude. And it's really exciting to basically be in this sweet spot where you have this massive economic growth, you have this huge pile of money that's being spent extraordinarily inefficiently, and you've got these 1 billion people who would really love to have an extra 25 cents a day. It would make a big impact on their lives. And so by connecting the dots, my hope is that we can make an impact on a scale that really hasn't been seen before. So thank you.
That was truly in the spirit of the keynote of Naveen Jain this morning. I don't know if you saw that, where he was talking about entrepreneur philanthropism. And it really sounds like you first had the idea to do something good, but then you had to find a business model for it and came up with that. Fantastic. It really relates to you, Bright, as well. Another mobile player in emerging markets. And I think you have some slides ready. So
Absolutely.
Let's hear what you have to say on mPedigree.
Thank you, Lucas. So, in most places, when I talk about African technology, some people get surprised because, as far as they're concerned, technology is science. And if you can have African biology or African chemistry, why should you have African technology? But the truth, of course, is that technology is not entirely science. A lot of technology is how our complex human systems interact with science. And our humanity is indeed diverse and complex and far from settled. So there is African technology. And the truth is, now African technology has gone mainstream. In 2013, something happened that dramatically changed how people perceive African technology. In one segment, in e-commerce, the amount of venture capital going into African technology exceeded the amount of money going to that same segment in Europe. $100 million plus in e-commerce applications alone. So clearly, what we are seeing is something economically significant, something transformative, something scalable. But my topic today is an attempt to convince you that though African technology going mainstream is something that all of us should cheer and look forward to, particularly those of you in the investment community, it will mean that potentially you could make a lot of money in Africa. However, there is something about African technology as it existed until 2013 that perhaps is worth preserving. And that this, whatever it is fundamentally, in some ways, different from the way technology is understood in the West. And that perhaps gives us a new vision of what technology can achieve for society. I like to say that for most Westerners, contact with technology and the perception of technology has been influenced by the notion of the singularity, the idea of man and machine merging. In my mind, this is a fundamentally individualistic take on technology. Something that makes even social media become selfie me too. And that fundamental individuality at the heart of Western technology, while powerful and empowering, is not complete. There is another vision of technology that is perhaps required to provide a holistic, global system of technology production that can actually transform the world. And therefore, my question to you is, what if technology was to be perceived more in terms of its social power to create communities and to influence the lives of people in those communities, and in ways that dramatically change the relations, the social relations among people, and create what you might call a soul and a spirit of communities? What do I mean in practice? Let me give you a couple of case studies, which will perhaps illustrate my meaning in a clearer and more empirical way. We started our own technology company a few years ago. The problem that we're trying to solve was one of the most dramatic problems of the last century. As much as $600 billion worth of brands are counterfeited yearly. That is the amount of money that companies that are brand owners lose every year due to people making things that look like the original, but in actual fact, it's a fake. So this is a huge problem of unbelievable proportions. And so many companies from every part of the world have tried to solve it in different ways. But approaching the problem differently from what had been done, particularly in the West, instead of focusing on the company whose product was being counterfeited and creating a fortress around the brand, by deciding instead to network governments, business, and consumers, creating a mobile application that enables people to instantly validate whether their product is right by accessing government records and government systems as well as the company systems in real time. We've created a fundamental application that changes the counterfeit game by being 1/10 the price of RFID, which is the competing system in much of the world, particularly the West. And by producing something that's 1/10 the price of how the problem had traditionally been solved, this application today is the most widely used electronic mechanism for checking counterfeiting or for delivering brand protection. Let me give you another case study, home security. In many urban centers around the world, personal security is a big challenge. Robberies, burglaries, kidnappings, etc. Here too, the way that the problem has been traditionally approached is to create a fortress system, to create a mechanism that is essentially not breachable by the intruder. And this is a multi-billion-dollar market. Yet in Africa, the same problem has been solved in a way that is completely different. The gentleman that you are looking at is often called the Bill Gates of Africa, but his take on technology is completely different. He came up with a system that the user could walk into a shop, pick up the starter pack, and graph their neighbors on the application. And once the neighbors allowed that to happen, if this person was under attack, that is the user or the customer, they will hit a panic button, and every member in that community who has opted into this grid gets notified by automated voice messaging. But at the same time, the local radio station, the local media networks get notified. And even more fascinatingly, private security companies in the neighborhood who have downtime get notified to send a rapid response team. I'll argue that this is a completely fundamentally different approach to the problem of home security that has ever been envisaged. And the fact that people are willing to take such ambitious and bold steps to create communities using technologies to address particularly complex and thorny problems is a different vision of technology. Or let me tell you about the story of these two gentlemen who have changed the face of enterprise resource planning in the world by introducing a completely new customer relationship management system that is so different from what the likes of the Oracles or the SAPs will provide that the world's largest telecom company today uses the application exclusively in Africa for customer relationship management. Why is it fundamentally different? Because the majority of people selling the products of this telecom company are semi-literate. They are on the streets, they are on the highways, selling products on the go. The ability to update inventory, to request new stock, etc., cannot happen in the traditional framework of enterprise resource planning and customer relationship management software that much of the world has become used to. Better than that, you need software that teaches people how to use it, rather than software, as is often the case, that requires huge budgets for training and consulting just to be relevant to a company. So what if you had a vision in which a particular software strategy was designed to teach people to become literate and competent, as opposed to forcing the company to spend more money to train people and to create new paradigms before the software could add value to the operations? What do you have that kind of worldview about widening literacy, about empowerment, etc.? Initially on, I mentioned the point of e-commerce and the fact that African e-commerce has currently attracted $100 million of investment, marking a milestone that changes everybody's perception about the economic significance of African technology. What I didn't mention was that even in e-commerce, where Africa is most closest to the mainstream, even in e-commerce, the African e-commerce miracle began differently. It was only in Africa that cash on delivery became the primary mechanism for paying for goods. Essentially, you buy the good online, they bring it to you, and then you pay for it. That completely, and in my view, dramatic divergence from the norm is where perhaps we should begin to look in trying to transform the current vision of technology from more and more gadgetry and individualism, from more and more instant gratification, towards a vision of technology that is communal, that is impactful, and that is empowering. Thank you.
Thank you, Wright. Any questions from the audience at this stage? All right, so we just, yeah? Down there.
Yeah, hello. My name is Tobias. When I went 2012 the first time, like, let's say, to the real Africa, not to Morocco or Egypt, like to Senegal, I was technically surprised by like how many people are actually already being mobile on the internet. In Senegal, if you have 1 penny on your phone, you're allowed to go online for free. So in a year 2012, where we were still discussing if Africa needs laptops for $100 or computers for $100, or still sending them our old computers, Africa said, hey, we don't need computers, we are online mobile. Everyone had a BlackBerry. That was kind of like the positive side, what I saw, hey, you guys are much further. I would have never expected that technically everyone in Senegal is already having a BlackBerry. The negative side on that is like I've seen a lot of people living in like very simple houses, having not even like running water or electricity, but kind of feel due to the pressure, yes, I have to be online, I have to get a BlackBerry or an iPhone, and I want to take part of that before I even maybe take care and say, hey, I want to like get maybe running water or having a working infrastructure. So I would like to hear your opinion about this positive side, Africa being much further than a lot of people would have expected, on a negative side, that maybe not having the need of having clean water and having the need of a BlackBerry or an iPhone with internet.
I'm happy to take it first, and then we can try a comment as well. Look, I think it's exactly the problem that I was talking about, right? Where this 10% of people's income going to the mobile operator is, from my perspective, unacceptable. And especially when you're talking about these underserved people who, where 25 cents is a very big deal to them. But I think the flip side of this, obviously, is that these are individuals who are making a choice. And they are really valuing connectivity. And if you look at, and if you look at a lot of these regions, the phone isn't just kind of a vanity object to put on a table and show off. The phone is kind of the lifeblood of how they make their money, how they protect their family. I mean, it really has become something that really is essential to their everyday life in ways that I think, while my iPhone is quite important to me, it pales in comparison. And so, I think it is up to them, and it's an extraordinary how much they spend on it, but I think it's indicative of the value that ultimately it's creating.
That's a good point, Nathan. I feel that the way to approach this is to look at the technology curve as has occurred in every society. It started with a very few people being productive. So you had blacksmiths, goldsmiths, people like that in Europe, the stonemasons, that became the Freemasons. And then over time, you had the Industrial Revolution, a few more people went into production in places like Manchester, etc., and not too far away from here, actually. But then over time, you got IT, which brings a lot more people into production, producing websites, producing content, etc. Africa is at the very early stages of the technology curve when you come to IT. So obviously, you will expect that it's consumption that will drive the uptick. People just want to experience this new thing, this new power. But I'm very sure that in the next couple of years, you will see a lot more Africans using technology for productive purposes. So because it's not like the internet, so you don't see a .com kind of bubble immediately, it's harder to understand how individuals in their own unique ways are creating new business models around mobile phones. The guy who just delivers vegetables just in demand, the gentleman who carries packages for people from supermarket to supermarket and then deliver it at home. All these small business models are not immediately visible like the web, because in the web you just have to type a URL. So it's harder to understand when you look at Africa, what are the business models emerging around mobile. It will take some time, but ultimately people will begin to realize that away from consumption, there's a greater move towards production, which is the same technology curve that has happened everywhere. And when that comes up, then the money that you are spending now can be viewed as investment. And that will change the perspective, in my view, of what mobile communications currently represent.
Thank you. Any more questions in the audience? Yeah.
Thank you. So I find this payment model quite interesting. So what are the other application areas you envision other than in this first step market surveys?
Sure, and I push back on the word payment, right? I mean, I say compensation, right? Because we've explicitly designed the technology to only push money in one direction. We don't take money from people. We can only, and technically it's impossible for us. Like we only can push it. And we're paying people for a huge number of different regions, and we're doing it now in dozens of countries. The World Bank is using our platform to try to figure out what the cost of a kilo of rice is in these local markets around the world, so that they can calculate something called purchasing power parity. Or large organizations, like mobile app developers, for example, and instant messaging clients are using our platform to try to build a user base and get people to refer their friends to use their particular IM client. If you go to rural India right now, you'll see billboards that say, "Get 10 rupees off of Clinic Plus shampoo." That's our campaign, where you go to the mom and pop bodega store, a store with no electricity, no technology at the point of sale, and we're giving people 10 rupees when they buy that shampoo. So the technology is used across a lot of different industries, and from my perspective, I love that, because again, my vision is trying to figure out how many different ways we can pay people, how many different things people can do ultimately that will enable them to earn money.
And Nathan, do you think this model is also applicable for saturated markets such as Germany? Talking about market research, stuff like that.
Look, I mean, there's a lot of ways. There's a lot of data about the German consumer. Right? German consumers have credit cards. And to get a German consumer to do something, you just give them a coupon. You send them an Amazon gift card, right? So from my perspective, there's a solution already, and it may not be optimal. But if you want to get a rural woman in Indonesia to go out and try your product, whether your product is Facebook or a bar of soap, we're the only game in town. Right? You either can put more money into the pockets of the people who own billboards in that rural community to try to push the message, but you still can't incentivize her to take that action. And so airtime really plays a very critical role in these emerging markets that it doesn't necessarily play in the more developed world.
I prefer to give my data more to the UN than to Google, Facebook, or Apple. So, any more questions in the audience? No? but we ran out of time anyhow, so wrapping up here. Thank you very much, Bri. Thank you very much, Nathan, for coming out. And this is also the end of day 3 here at DLD downstairs. So the final sessions will be upstairs only. It was very nice having you, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Thanks, Bri.